every day is a rough day in pandemic work life these days. But no, look, I'm enjoying life. It's despite not being able to do much. I don't know. I think I'm blessed. I've got two kids who are pretty reasonable
Yeah.
in their approach to us, which is always nice, and just what they're doing as well. So it's kind of a good place to be right now with the kids. Really enjoying that part of it, but also like everyone else, looking forward to getting out there doing things. Right?
For sure. And it's funny, anyone who hasn't spent some time in the last year reading the Stoics has missed an opportunity, because this is one of those great obstacles that there's nothing we can do about it. Right.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people railing about hating the rules and hating this. And it's like, but we're not going to change those. So look at what you can affect and affect that, and look at the things you can affect and accept them. Right.
Yeah. Make the most of it. Right. They teach you that in sport. You
Yeah.
take what you're given, and obstacles. Obstacles in obstacle sport racing is all about that, right? That's why you do it. That's why a lot of people kind of jump into it. It's about dealing with the unexpected, not about what you can control. So that's what we're dealing with.
That's actually one of the things. That's one of the things I loved about old school. I know we're still sort of preambling as people roll in. Hey, y'all! But back in my first iteration as a Spartan race director and quality management, that was when the motto was very much, you'll know at the finish line. And like we didn't post maps beforehand, and the idea was, it's kind of from the old death race mindset. If you don't know when it starts, you don't know when it ends, you don't know what you'll do. Yeah. We at least told you when it started, and you figured out when it ended, but you still didn't know what you did. Now, obviously, as a sport, it's a little different, where people have setups in their backyard so they can train, so they kind of need to know. I created a huge kerfuffle in 2017, I guess, when we were short an obstacle, and we were at Highlands Nordic, where they happened to have a disc golf course. So I reeled in the disc golf baskets, and at the last thing before the finish line was a disc golf throw. And people were livid because they don't know how to throw a disc. I've been training for this in my backyard for the last 6 months. Fortunately, it did not affect the finishing order, partly because Ryan Atkins can do everything, and he hit the disc. If he'd missed the disc, the next one, if he'd missed the next one, it would have been oh man, I'd have had my hell to pay.
Yeah, I think everyone missed except for him. That was a fun event.
He hit it, and then 2 and 3 both missed. I knew that my podium for at least the men was secure, right? I don't think at the end of the day it did affect any podium positions, but I did fall back on my OG cred as hey, you'll know at the finish line, even though that has sort of morphed.
That was truly the case. Well, Johnny, thanks for joining us today. I'm Tom Petryshen, folks. I'm here with Dave Claxton and Johnny Waite. We're here talking today about Spartan Race Canada and their schedule. Johnny, for those of you who don't know him, is a second-time operations manager with Spartan Canada, third time back with Spartan Canada, but has been involved with Spartan US and international for numerous years, has taken breaks, and is now back officially in the capacity of the operations manager for Spartan Canada. So welcome, Johnny. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be back. And like you mentioned, I've sort of been around for a long time. I did the first Spartan race in Canada as a participant, got reeled into the death race world after that, where I sort of cut my teeth as a racer and a director. And then my first stint in Spartan was as quality management. So as it was starting to expand into all these new countries, because at first it was Canada, the US, and the UK, and then it went into Eastern Europe, and then into Mexico, and then Australia. I got hired on as the quality manager. So that was really cool, going in all those new markets and seeing it explode all around the world and trying to maintain some standards. And then I did that 13, 14, 15, took 16 off, came back 17, 18, 19 with the last licensee in Canada to be the race director, and really enjoyed that. And I do feel that we did a great job of sort of elevating the races during those years and sort of bringing Canada forward. But the hard part is that Canada's never been able to be all the way caught up to the US just because of scale. The US has 50, 60 races a year, and can go year round because you've got southern climates as well. And in Canada, we have a shorter race season and this crazy geography of east and west where, it was impractical to be bringing stuff all the way back and forth across the country and maintain a schedule. So there were always so many compromises made out of necessity. The licensees just couldn't afford to put on the full show of Spartan. And because of the proximity of Canada to the US, it was glaring. Do you know what I mean? Like if you went to a race in Slovakia and it wasn't entirely up to the standard of the race that you're at here, it didn't seem quite as glaring because you hadn't just gone from Montana to Alberta to Seattle to Vancouver and can compare them like that. So there's a lot of pressure for Canada to be on par with the States. And I understand from a racer perspective why that's important, because you really do want to have the same product. But I also have had a very clear view from a licensee standpoint why it wasn't always feasible and why it was very, very difficult and challenging. And I think that licensees, to their credit, have always done as good a job as they could of maintaining fairly high standards. Certainly safety and course difficulty and things like that were always there. But just in terms of not being able to provide all the obstacles and all the bells and whistles that come along with the U.S. event. So this time around, the U.S. decided to actually take it in-house. It's all being sort of, decisions are being made out of Boston, and Canada doesn't have a separate licensee. We're like the UK is, where we're operated by the US. But there are some familiar faces on the ground up here. Myself, Nick Bertrand is still our construction manager. Bear, everyone knows Bear, and so it's hopefully the best of both worlds, where we have the full support of the US machine and behemoth, but local representation as far as getting the job done here on the ground. So that's the long version of what I'm doing now.
And for the first time, that includes both Spartan race as well as Tough Mudder.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting dynamic, right? Because with Spartan having bought Tough Mudder last year, the tail end of the year before, I guess, it's really awesome in that Tough Mudder still exists as its own entity. Like, it's not like it's disappeared or it's just been absorbed by Spartan. It's not being watered down at all. It is very much a completely separate brand, but there's so much opportunity to work with each other, like where it used to be that they would intentionally put races on close to each other to try and be the one who won, and now we want Tough Mudder to succeed and Spartan to succeed. So there's shared resources back and forth, shared calendars, and making sure that racers in Canada have the opportunity to do as many of both of those events as possible, which is fantastic. And I'm very excited to be part of that brand too, in a supporting role. Well,
yesterday, when we caught up briefly, you mentioned that there were some announcements coming out regarding the schedule. Yeah. So both with Spartan as well as Tough Mudder, but and I know there was a flurry of emails sent to those folks who have registered for the early events coming up in May and June in Quebec and Ontario. Yeah. What's the schedule looking like for you guys right now? Because let's face it, we're still in lockdown for a lot of us across the country. Feels it very difficult to kind of see 2 months in advance, never mind 4, 5, 6 months. So how are you guys looking at the schedule for this year, and what are those major changes that you guys are foreseeing at this point? Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of part answer. First of all, everyone saw the first Spartan race of the year happen in Jacksonville last weekend, which is awesome. It went off very, very well. Garfield and his team did a spectacular job. Curiously, the last 3 North American Spartan races have all been in Jacksonville, because that's the last place they had one before the world shut down. They managed to squeeze one in May of last year, and then it was where they relaunched this season. So good on them. That's fantastic. Canada's a lot more careful, or I say conservative, not in a political term, but in terms of Florida is a test case where they were allowed to do a race, and they did it, and they still followed the most stringent COVID guidelines. So even things that they didn't have to do in Florida, they still did it in Florida. I know their next race in Texas, or one of the next races in Texas just announced, go nuts, no masks, no anything. Spartan is still having masks, still having social distancing. And so in Canada, we're going to be following the strictest protocols that we can. And the reason for that is that even, say, for example, Ontario were to say, we're going to be more permissive on what you can do as far as numbers of people and things like that than Alberta. We want Alberta to look what we're doing in Ontario and say, we want them to come here. Does that make sense? So all of our planning for the season is kind of assuming the worst on the COVID front and being ready to adapt to that. But the direct answer to the schedule is we had to make some pretty significant changes. The first thing being to drop the first 2 events of the year, because we spoke with the partners, the venues, and they just didn't have any confidence level, nor did we, that we'd be able to get permits for May races. So we sat down and said, if we're going to do that, we really have to look at the whole schedule. Because, for example, we were canceling our Quebec race and our other race on the border of Quebec
and there wasn't another one later in the year. And that's not viable to not have a Spartan race in Quebec. I mean, that's one of our absolute best, most long-term loyal markets. So we had to see where we could pull from somewhere to have a race in Quebec. So our objective was this: get our core product out there, make sure that we're delivering it in a way that is quality and getting it to as many people as we can. And so we said, okay, we've got a couple of races out west. We've got a couple of races in the east. We got to make sure we get a race in Quebec. How are we going to do this? So the email went out yesterday. Normally I wouldn't be talking about this because there hasn't been the big announcement, the big social media announcement, things like that yet on it. But there was an email went out yesterday to registered racers that said, guys, this is what's happening. And I know the minute that one goes out, everyone's talking. It's all over the place. So there's no secrets anymore. And my philosophy has always been to get out in front of everything, because we do a lot of things right and sometimes we do things wrong. And like, for example, I've had race issues where, you know, I've had a problem at a race that I've organized and there's been some legitimate racer feedback that they weren't happy about it. So I've come on a program like this and said, I want to take that one right in the chin. And it's the same with this. I think we're doing this right, but I want to explain to people why, rather than everyone have their own theories and then me try and apologize for it later. So this is the schedule. There's not a race in May in Quebec. There's not a race in May in Ottawa. There is a race in Toronto in June. It's exactly the same as it was on the schedule. Now, somebody said to me the other day, well, didn't Toronto just announce no public events until July? That's Toronto proper. You know, the city of Toronto is not doing any major events until July. We're in Durham, outside of Toronto. I've spoken with Brimacombe, you know, they're making their plans for their summer camps, things like that. So we're all acting on the assumption that we are going to be able to have a race in June. And Tom, you and I talked about yesterday about the idea that there does seem to be some really promising news on the vaccination front, where 2 weeks ago, it looked like Canada was going to be at the tail end of every line for vaccines, and everyone was assuming the worst, that we wouldn't be vaccinated till the fall. And now every time you look at the news, there's another one that's been approved, or there's somehow we've managed to buy more from overseas. And I really do think that it is going to start to turn to the better, where we're maybe further ahead of the schedule. So June in Toronto, yes. July in Golden, BC, yes. August in Red Deer, yes. So those three are unchanged, and that's awesome, and we're stoked about that. The next one, and it did get canceled, is Whistler. And the reason for that is because we've got an event in BC, we've got an event in Alberta, we have to have an event in Quebec, and that's really the only slot that it would work. So we've canceled the Whistler race, and then we're bringing everything back across the country to get it to Quebec. And I'll talk about that. We'll bookmark that when I say we'll bring it all back across the country. As anyone who knows behind the scenes, we used to have 2 trailer sets for the East and the West because this crazy geography of Canada. Because we want to bring all the obstacles to all the racers, we've put it onto 1 6-truck set instead of 2 3-truck sets. So the stuff we're bringing back forth across country is crazy. We'll talk about that, the new obstacles, things like that. But so that's when we're coming back across country. We're going to support the Tough Mudder event in Toronto in September, which means we're going to have our Quebec event on October 2nd. And that one, it's venue TBD. Nick's working hard on finding us a venue. I say Nick because he's Francophone. He is as bilingual as I am unilingual. That guy's great. So anyway, but yeah, we are working on a venue, ideally very close to Montreal. In a perfect world, it'll be on the west side of Montreal to sort of help the people who are losing a race in Ottawa. And then the end of October, we've got a race at Blue Mountain, and that one's such a great venue. Anyone who knows Blue Mountain, it was the site of OCRWC a few years ago, so a lot of people were there for that. It's like a mini Tahoe. I mean, it's got the great formerly Intra-West Village. It has awesome elevation, awesome terrain, and as a race director, I'm very excited because usually when you're working with a mountain venue, it's a pain in the butt. I mean, like, it's so hard to get up and down those hills with your machinery, and your radios don't work half the time because they can't bounce over that hill. Blue Mountain is really cool because, I mean, it's about 1,000 feet of elevation. So you've got some really cool climbs and ups and downs. It's got amazing wooded mountain bike type terrain that we can be running through, but there's nowhere that we can't get with machinery, and there's nowhere that we don't have radio coverage. So we can put on a much, I don't want to say a safer race because our races are always safe, but it's easier to put on that safe race, and we can put on some more interesting build locations because we can get to them. And for après and things like that, it's as good as anywhere in the world as far as the restaurants and the patios and the village. And by the end of October, I think we'll be fully able to utilize all that, which is great. And then the last change is we did cancel the winter Quebec race. And the reason for that is that, like I said, we just want to focus on our core product. We want to make sure that we're putting on the best races that we can. And behind the curtain, we're going to lose money on all those races this year because most of the races are coming from deferred credits from last year. So, that was money that came into Spartan last year that just even keep the lights on. Obviously, a lot of that isn't there for the races this year. And so the races are expensive as ever to produce. In fact, even a little bit more with some of the COVID protocols and things like that. We're honoring all those deferred credits from last year, of course. We're definitely bringing on new racers, but not, the numbers that we would if we didn't have all these deferred racers. And so these 5 events we know we can put on. We can do a great job on them. We know we can staff them. Everything's going to be amazing. The winter race was very much a new product for us. We haven't done winter races in Canada. The idea was, hey, let's do it. Now that feels like a bit of a luxury this year to go and put on a race that's inherently going to have a lower registration, inherently going to be a bit tougher to produce at the end of what's going to be an incredibly challenging year. So we decided we're going to revisit everything for 2022. So 2021, we're going to put on 5 amazing, awesome races at great venues with good representation in the West and Ontario and Quebec. Maritimes and central provinces. Someday we're going to get to you guys. We keep trying. We really do. We've floated it. We've looked at different ways to get there. But in 2022, that's when we're going to come back and say, okay, now we're going back to a full schedule. 8 to 10 Spartan races. I know Tough Mudder is going to branch out from their one in Toronto this year to more like 3 or 4 in 2022. And we will be looking at things like stadium races and winter races and all the things we want to bring. And that was a big part of why Spartan Race brought it back in-house in the US, because licensees were always a little bit challenged to match that kind of product. And Spartan said, we want the Canadians to have that kind of product. So we're going to bring it in-house and we're going to do it. And then boom, get hit with COVID, where you've got a year with no races whatsoever. And now we're going to a year that's going to be extra challenging to put them on, but we're going to do it. But the objective is the exact same, to get to where we can do it all. How's that for a soliloquy answer?
Well, it's very eloquent. I know from a user experience, there's always been the question mark of why races in Canada, why we don't have stadium races, why they're not at the same level as the American races, whether it just be the venues or the types of obstacles or even the weights of the obstacles compared to what we'd experience in the US for those who traveled, right? So obviously that's a big part of transitioning this year for Spartan Race.
Yeah, big time. And it really is a standardization. So anything that, like, for example, with the license model in the past, it'd be Hercules hoist, and other markets like Canada would say, cool, we're going to make a Hercules hoist. We're not going to make it the exact same way you do. And the problem with that is that the US thinks these things through with an eye on, and how can we then modify it? So for example, monkey bars, their monkey bar set was also able to then very quickly turn into Twister, right? Because it was adapted, whereas we created a steel frame platinum rig monkey bars, which was great, but then we couldn't just adapt it. So, and then also to carry the number of obstacles back and forth across the country wasn't feasible for the licensee. But this year, I'm going to tell you the 6 new obstacles that we have. And I thought I was going to try and sort of describe each of them to you. I'm going to say them and then let people go online and figure what they are, because you can find videos for all of them because they all exist in the States. But we're going to have Twister, which we haven't had Canada, but that's an easy add. Beater, which is not unlike Twister, but it shifts everything perpendicularly, which is pretty cool. Vertical cargo net is now going to have the shelf, so it changes up the dynamic of that obstacle. We've got a great one called Helix, which is similar to a traverse wall, but requires a lot more contorting. It's a pretty cool thing. Pipe layer, which I think of as kind of being like the laser scene in whatever the movie that Catherine, what's her name, had to go through between all the lasers. It requires lots of twisting and turning and getting you through that. And then the box. So far, those are the obstacles that we've added. And so it's at least 6 brand new obstacles and 1 amended obstacle with the vertical cargo net. And so it is going to be a much more parallel experience to the US. And then the other things that they don't seem like big things, but they actually are. Like, for example, in the US, they have a dedicated MC for, the start line, finish line. And then they've got a dedicated DJ who's making sure that the energy's up and things like that. And we've never had that luxury in Canada where, either one person's been doing both or the music's just sort of put on auto. And this year we're doing that whole show. Now, the other thing that I want to mention with that's a challenge is, again, the whole COVID thing. Because in the past, the objective has been have such a great festival experience that nobody wants to leave. The only problem it sometimes creates is with parking. But when people get their start of the day, if they race early in the day, you want them there cheering and having fun and enjoying the beer garden and high-fiving their friends and maybe jumping in and volunteering in the afternoon. And I know that with caps on number of people at venues, that, for example, at Jacksonville, they didn't have a kids race and they didn't have spectators because they had to stay to their cap. And so, for example, if we get into a situation in Canada where they say you can have a 2,000 person event, well, we can't have half of that be spectators and another half be parents of kids and not room for the racers. So if that's the case, then we have to get into how do we get people in for their race and back out, which isn't our objective. Our objective is to have the music pounding and have everyone high-fiving and have the fire jump high all day and things like that. And we're working right now on the operating assumption that we can put on the races exactly the way we want to put them on. Obviously, wherever there's a requirement from a government standpoint to say, no, you can only have this many people, we have to figure out how to make that work. How do we have that many people and still get everyone through for the race and still provide the whole product? So there's a lot of planning going on right now and contingency planning. And so, for example, I really do think that October race, it should just be full tilt. By October, we really should be where, just do your thing, go and have fun. The June race, will we be wearing masks? Absolutely wearing masks. Will we be dealing with having to figure out how many people we can have in the venue at one time? Almost certainly. And so and then the other thing that I just want to mention to people that I know that people have different opinions on COVID and on mitigation and on masks, on all these other things and on vaccinations and whatever else. I'm not worried about the politics of any of it. Like, I don't care what my opinion is or your opinion or anyone else's opinion is that. What I care is, what do we have to conform to put on races? So, for example, I know, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but that in Texas, they've said, you don't have to have anything. Stores can do whatever they want. Nobody has to wear a mask. That's fine. And some people are like, yes, finally, that's great. I know Spartan is still going to have masks and everything at that event because Massachusetts is going to be watching what happens in Texas, and California and Washington State are going to watch what happens in Texas. And so we really want to be able to say, look, we're following the most stringent guidelines for this point in time, so that we're welcome anywhere that we go.
I'm going to jump in there, Johnny, and actually you should be really proud of yourself because this is the longest I've shut up in my life. I don't think I've ever been this quiet this long. Anyway, I'm processing a lot of questions here that people have for us.
Okay.
So the first one I'm going to deal with is a bit of a financial question. So when you have people that are registered for both Ottawa and Montreal, and that's going to be combined into, to the one race scenario, how will they be dealing with transfers? Will they get an extra race for the other races, and will it cost them to transfer that?
No, that's a great question. And I'll tell you what I know so far and what I'm advocating for. So I actually saw that exact question come across on our channel yesterday. And because we have positioned it that the new Quebec race is really to replace Ottawa and Montreal. And so they're being transferred into that race. And, they can then, if they can't go to that race, they can say, no, I'd like to use that race credit for somewhere else. So say somebody lives in Kingston, and they were going to go to the Ottawa race, and they say that weekend in Quebec doesn't work for me, but I really want to go to Blue and I wasn't registered for that yet. I know they are going to be able to move their credit to a different race if they want to. But back to your specific question about, so I'm super eager, I'm your perfect customer. I signed up for both Montreal and Quebec, and you've canceled them both and told me now I get to go to one. Yes, technically what's happening is there's going to be 2 race credits show up for them for that race. They then have the option to say, I'm going to move one of them somewhere else, so I'm not going to use them both there. Or they could transfer it to someone else and say, great, I'm going to bring my buddy who I've always been trying to get to race, and I'm going to make him come and use this credit. The part that I can't answer yet, but I'm advocating for, is will there be service charges for that? I don't think there should be. And I know that Spartan's trying to be fair on these things, and that there's all kinds of conversations going on there about how do we do this. So yeah, in a perfect world, what should happen is you should be able to move that credit to another race and not have a charge to do that. Can I promise that's the case? No, only because that's above my pay grade and I don't know the answer to that right now. But I do know that that's the conversation that's happening, is 100% for sure make it so they can do it. And then there's definitely a strong camp suggesting that it not have a fee attached to it, because this is outside of people's control, obviously. Yeah. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, very fair. That's good. I mean, honestly, some of these questions you're going to be able to answer, some of them you're not, because some are just, again, out of your realm of expertise, and some just don't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, keep going. Let's hear more questions. I like this.
So in your list of obstacles that you went off, and quite frankly, for me, I'm very excited about that, because that has been a long complaint of mine, that we've been missing some of the obstacles. Yeah. And so it's great to see. But one obstacle that was missing from that list, and actually it was very big this weekend in Jacksonville, is the 400-pound tire. Yeah,
so that's a great question. So I was actually talking with Nick about that today, about what we're doing about tire flip. And it is funny when you say that about Tom. You mentioned about the weight differences. You know, like instead of a 120-pound sandbag, it'd be a 90-pound sandbag, and you'd say, well, why is this? It's not like Canadians aren't as strong as Americans, and I think part of it in past years was a flow issue. That you know, in the States where they would have 32 lanes at their Hercules hoist, and we'd have 16, you just couldn't have people spending as long doing it, and so there'd be some accommodations for that to keep things flowing and not have those great big lineups. But this year, absolutely, anything that is the standard in the States is the standard in Canada. Tire flip is an interesting one, because that is such a cool obstacle. And I know that was actually, there was a long call today about that, because there were way more men have ever failed the tire flip in Jacksonville than ever did before. And it was because it was rainy and misty and the tires were slick and everything else. They're trying to figure it out. But Yokohama is a great sponsor in the States, and they provide the tires and they deliver the tires. And to have, you know, it would essentially be a full trailer additional just to take tires race to race. So I'm working hard to get us a similar situation where we have the tires sponsored, and it's not the cost of the tires; it's the getting the tires to and from events and position them and everything else. So in Canada in the past, you know, I also go back to the early days, the wild west, where it wasn't quite as uniformly competitive. And I think that's really what's been Spartan's success, is that it has positioned itself as a sport. And in a sport, you can't have one person flipping a 320-pound tire and one person flipping a 280-pound tire and one person flipping a 370-pound tire that all kind of look the same. And that is what it was. You know, you have the red X on the men's ones and the pink X on the ladies' ones, or whatever it was. And that was okay when it was mud runs, like back in the day when it was you just out there to get your Facebook picture and your medal and then your, you know, which was awesome. And that was the start of the sport. But then as it became more of a sport and not just an event, obviously we have to standardize things. So the answer is, if we do have tires, which I hope we will, they will be the same standard as the US as far as weight goes. Can I promise that we'll have them? At this point, I can't, because we don't have that sponsorship deal like they do yet. But we're definitely exploring that exact sponsorship deal. And if we don't get that, what other ones we could have.
Awesome. Okay, another question. To your knowledge, and this might change as the season progresses, are you going to have the water obstacles such as dunk wall and rolling mud?
Yeah, great question. So in the planning, I know that was one of the first things that they were pulling out in the US in terms of saying there's two issues with that. One is, you know, when they didn't really know exactly what was going on with transmission, it was the idea, is it a good idea to put a whole bunch of people into the same water and have them come out of the same water? I don't know if that's as big an issue. The other one that actually is that that's always one that there's a big, we're looking to not have people stopping in the same spots. So everyone gets the water and half of them stop. and this isn't necessarily the elite waves, keeping in mind that there's two whole different animals, right? The elite wave, they're in, they're out, they're gone. The open wave, they stand and they huddle and they wait for their friends to get there and they go, oh, are we getting in? This is cold. I'm not saying all of them, but that does happen. And then when they get out, they're standing there, they're getting the water off. And we're just trying to not have a whole bunch of people standing near each other at the same time. So I know that right now, one of the considerations is not having the rolling mud and the water, but that's not written in stone. But certainly that is a conversation. And the other hard thing with it is we're planning for a 5-month season that starts 3 months from now, based on what we know today, and who knows what the situation is going to be later. But the hard thing is we have to make our planning well in advance. We've got to do our budgeting and figure out our machinery expectations and our staffing. Are we hiring somebody who's a dig expert or aren't we? And so some of that stuff could change.
Yeah, it's definitely a floating target, that's for sure. I mean, that's why I don't expect you to be, especially for you consider.
Please don't use floating and water when you're talking to a race director, because that makes me think of a body.
We'll call it moving target.
For a lot of people, we're just anxious to race. If you love this sport, or if you just like to get out there with your buddies and your friends and roll around in the mud, everyone just wants to get out of that damn house and be able to go to a race. So I don't think you'd have a lot of complaints from people whether there was an obstacle or not this year. But for you guys, obviously, you're trying to build a brand again.
Exactly, but it's a totally fair question though, right? Because people want to know what to expect, and if they come in expecting, of course, there's going to be that, and there isn't, then there's a disappointment. So I'm really glad to be asked these questions, because I'm going to give honest expectations, and and on that one right now, that's a big part of what we're looking at not having is the water obstacles. Is it because we don't want them? Oh my God, I love them. They're my favorite. You put it right beside the beer garden, and then everyone's going out of the rolling mud, like in Collingwood and in Red Deer. Those are the best rolling muds. But again, this year, we just want to get you racing. We want to get you racing safely. We want to give you a good, competitive, awesome experience. And if there are some things that are then brought back full tilt for 2022, so be it. But the key is to get you out there racing. So thanks for mentioning that. No
problem. You also touched on safety protocols. Obviously, there are more because of the pandemic at this point. Is there anything else that you guys are bringing in that's new to the market that you hadn't done previously, outside of the hand sanitizer that you'll have to do in other elements? Yeah,
exactly. So one thing that I've pushed hard for, and it looks like we do have, is the fall mats. Because in Canada and in a lot of other markets, it's always been straw and hay and sort of more temporary mitigation where we bring that in. And I really think it's important, as we're getting people going over things faster and harder and everything else, that there's more opportunity for slipping. And so we expect to have fall protection mats at all obstacles that require fall protection. Let me think. The medical team, we've always had good medical in Canada. We really always have. The team this year, I'm super confident in, and again, following all the American protocols as far as how we do our medical. So from that standpoint, I think that it's going to be even a step up from what we've had in the past. Beyond that, I'm trying to think of other things that, from a safety standpoint, I do feel that in markets like Canada, where we've had to make some compromises on some of the product offerings, we've tried really hard not to make compromises on safety, and because obviously that's the baseline. I have yet to, knock on all kinds of wood here, have a life-altering situation. I've never had anyone severely injured or certainly die, and it's a risk sport, but we've always put safety front and center. And so but from a COVID standpoint, there are certainly some things like where we're not going to have. I know, for example, in the States, they didn't have change tents at this first event, because they didn't want to create a situation where you're moving into somewhere where the airflow is stopped and you're breathing hard at the end of a race and you're standing beside each other. So from a customer service standpoint, of course, people love change tents. From a safety standpoint, I think it's something that people are definitely willing to give up to be safe.
One of the things that actually comes up, and this is something I had looked for before and really would hoped we would get here, and I guess now we're getting to questions that are a little more fun. Open houses. Any chance of open houses this year? Because, and like Tom says, everybody's excited to get out there, so I know they'd love to jump on right away.
Yeah, so you mean like a Friday night kind of thing, like the day before the race, and yeah, so again, a lot of the things that the U.S. does are now becoming the standard in Canada. So as the race director, it's like, oh, you guys do that? I guess I better find out how to do that. But one thing that actually ties into that is Friday night trail runs, and I know that that a lot of the events actually have a Friday night 10K trail race, and the trail event's awesome. Like I'm very excited about that because it's such a cool extra offering. I think a lot of people assume that what it would be was you run the obstacle race and go to the obstacles, which seems like a weird thing to do. And I know that our trail design, it's very much we're using the same start and same finish, but getting you off that course as fast as we can and into totally different terrain where you're doing some awesome hill running that isn't included in the obstacle race, and awesome running along forested trails. And like, for example, a venue that we have so much opportunity that we haven't used before is at Brimacombe, in behind that pond. Mark Rutherford, great guy, the manager at Brimacombe, and he pointed out, he said, dude, you have so much terrain there. And in the past, the reason we didn't use it is because we wanted to have that festival experience where as much as we could, we'd have you go out and come back and go out and come back, and to go and do a 9K trail run where we didn't really have opportunities to build obstacles didn't fit that. So now we have both. We have our traditional OCR where you've got the outs and backs and then using all the terrain of the ski hill and everything else, but the opportunity to go and do a 10K trail run that is just absolutely gorgeous out along the pond and all through the woods and some stuff that we've never been able to do before. So with some of those being Friday nights, it makes total sense to do open houses on Friday nights. So the answer is that I agree with you. It's something we should do, and that means most likely it's going to happen.
You know what else looks like a lot of fun on Friday nights is Spartan Cross. Just saying. Notice.
Now that's one. It's funny. I actually had that conversation today. That's very much in beta.
Do it.
And there are some of these things that they've just pulled that off for the first time in Jacksonville. And would I love by the end of the year to say we're doing a Spartan Cross beta at one of our events? Sure. Will it be a standard offering this year? No. That's very much something that's being developed and tweaked. And even that first one, I know on the call today there was a lot of conversation about what did we do right, what did we do wrong, what are we going to do differently. And I think that in the past, one thing that's been a challenge for licensees is, a new product comes out and it's like everyone adopted immediately, but then it does have to be changed and adapted and morphed and whatnot. And so, you've got everyone zigging when they zig, and then they've already zagged by the time we zig and zag. And so I'm fully in support of the idea that they're going to iron out the bugs down there and then bring it up here. So that's when I'm going to be 100% straight up and say, do not expect Spartan Cross in Canada this year unless it's towards the end of the year and it's a beta offering.
Yeah, I was hoping, and I figured maybe something for 2022. I mean,
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, for sure.
You guys got a lot on your plate for this year.
I would be shocked if we don't have it in 2022 for sure.
All right, I'm holding you to that for sure. Coming 2022.
No.
Totally.
I would be shocked if we don't have it for sure. So you can shock me. That's what you can do. You can shock me if we don't have it.
All right. One of the other questions that a lot of us have been asking is, and again, might be very tough for you to answer, is a Canadian series likely?
Yeah, there is. 100% there is. It's funny. I answered somebody this earlier when I said, because it hasn't been officially announced, I can't tell you exactly what ones are going to be. I know that they're already discussing it with, the pro team and things like that to make sure that it works. I believe one of our objectives is to spread them out so they're not all back to back. And with 5 races, that gives you a pretty good idea what they're going to be. There is for sure going to be a Canadian series. And that'll be announced soon. And
are we looking at like a 3-race series probably?
Yep. There'll be a sprint, a super, and a beast. Yep.
So we start doing the math. It's going to be pretty easy to figure that one out.
Well, I think we could probably tell what the beast is going to be.
We'll see. We have 2 great beast venues, right? So we'll see. But again, that's going to be officially announced soon, and I don't want to take any of the thunder away from that. And things can change too in the meantime, right? So, but as it stands, what I can say for sure is there is definitely a Canadian series, and it is going to be a 3-race series.
Okay. Someone asked if you guys are hiring.
Well, no. Actually, you know what? Legitimately, we are, and I'll tell you where our challenge is with that this year is when our season is shorter than it's been, and it also starts later and goes later. You know, in the past, if you're the US and you've got 50, 60 races and you've got all these different zones, you can hire some full-time people and just move them around as you need them, right? And in Canada, we tended more towards the student type hires for festival and build because our races went from the end of the university to the start of the university. We started May 24 and ended on Labor Day. So this year, from a hiring standpoint, what I've been doing some interviewing lately, and the one thing that's almost what's what I'm looking for, not disheartening, but it makes me really feel for people because I'm looking at these resumes and realizing how many people right now are out of their normal work. I mean, we've got some incredibly overqualified people in the event industry because there's a lot of events just not happening, and so at least we're ahead of the curve now, getting out there and hiring people. But also, you know, we're not offering full-time work this year because we have 5 races and aren't in a position to. So we want to have amazingly skilled people who are in a position to come and work for 5 races a year, and either fit that around their other gigs, so somebody who's self-employed and can pick their own schedule, which is awesome, or somebody who doesn't have work and this is a great opportunity for them. But we also have to understand that you know, if their old work comes knocking and has gone from full-time work, we may have to adapt. So the answer to that question is this: if you're somebody who particularly build is where we do still have a few positions available, and if there's somebody who thinks they'd be a great addition to the build team, can look at that 5 race schedule and say, yeah, I could definitely work sort of the you know, the 12-day window around that, and could commit to all 5 races, and it works in their life, 100% reach out to me. You know, I think my Facebook link's probably in here. You can send me a Facebook message and just say, hey, I'm your guy. I know that we've had incredibly encouraging calls this week, like where I look at our potential kids race team and go, oh my God, that's just a dream team. Like, you know, that's, you couldn't have better people. And some of the build hires that you know, Nick and I have interviewed so far have been like, these guys and gals are amazing. So the quality people we're getting is great. There are still a few spots available, certainly from a build standpoint.
Awesome. You're getting a lot of compliments here. Everybody's very happy you're back, by the way. You're getting a lot of egos, so you can take that as a bit of an ego stroke. One more question about the Canadian series. Will there be prize money equal to that of the series in the States? Because I remember in 2019 that was going to be the next thing. It was going to be on equal footing. You had a lot of the US pros saying, oh, we're going to come up and race Canadian series because it's equal prize money. I'm not sure if you know that, but
well, so yeah, I'll tell you a couple things on that. So just a real quick thing. So at the end of 2019, where I just worked 3 years for the licensee, and you know, we'd worked our butts off and put on great races, but I knew that the US was going to come in and do things differently. And the reason at that time that I declined the opportunity to be the race director, as I said, out of necessity, I've had to learn how to do things creatively, right? And it was always Denise Mast's job to come and try and kick me in the butt to not do it exactly the way they did it. And I'd say, well, here's why I have to do it this way. And I said, I've got some bad habits that it's easier for me to not unlearn those, right? So now the idea is they are standardizing everything. That's the objective. The objective is, if it's A in the States, it's A in Canada. If it's B in the States, it's B in Canada. And when I came back on, it was because with no races in 2020, and the race director they'd hired, great guy, but he didn't have a lot of racing experience. And this year looking like a very challenging year. They just said, let's just go back to basics. Let's just get somebody who knows our venues, who knows what to do, and that's why I'm here. And I really appreciate, by the way, I very much appreciate the kudos on people being glad that I'm back. I do pride myself on bringing positive energy to the events and taking it seriously and wanting to make sure that everyone is valued, whether it's the pro racers, the elite racers, the age group racers, the open racers, all equally important to me. And I'll tell you, some of my favorite experiences are watching that last person come across the line. It's every bit as important as the first person across the line. So I think that, you know, any love that I've managed to build up, it's because of that. So thank you all. Back to your initial question, it sounds like I'm fudging and trying not to answer it. I don't know the answer to that. I know that they have to look at all kinds of things this year. I know that the intention, and I haven't heard otherwise, is that everything's going to be equal. But I'm also going to be really logical about why there's been a difference in the past and explain why it may be a challenge to harmonize that. I mean, in SoCal, there'd be an 18,000 person weekend, and they're paying in American dollars the same that we pay in Canadian dollars for our races here. It's pretty easy to pay out a big chunk of prize money at that race. When you have a Canadian race that has 6,000 people over the course of the weekend and they're paying in Canadian dollars instead of US dollars, and then people say, hey, we want the same prize money, it's really, really hard. And as a business model, it's impossible. And so when it's been a licensee who is, as much as they love the sport, they're also trying to do it as a business. And there just was not a business case to say, I'm going to pay that money, because the other side of that is, does it get more people to come to the race? No, because there's only half a dozen people who have the opportunity to make that money anyway, right? And the States is a very, very competitive culture, and it's really driven this sport side of things, which is awesome. And we're certainly on board with that. But do 90% of the racers give a flying fadoodle if there's more prize money? No, because it doesn't affect them. Do the pros have every right to expect that there would be equal? I totally understand their position. So it's a matter of balancing those two things out. So what I would say is that that I think that what we could expect is that there will be more consistent prize money, and there will be more fair prize money, maybe is a good word to use. Can I promise it'll be exactly on par with the States? I can't promise that, but I truly don't know. Maybe the answer is yes, and I just don't know that yet. But that's not something I'm privy to at this point.
Awesome. This one actually just came in, and this is probably something more for the media staff, but is there a list of the Canadian Spartan team members?
Yeah, I tell you, I've done a very intentional job of staying out of that, and the reason being, I've become very close friends with some of them, and I love them to death, right? And if someone were to say to me, Johnny, you need to pick the pro team, I'd really be challenged. So I know that they're in the process of that. I know that they had a call a little while ago with some of the ones who've been on the pro team in the past to sort of figure out the logistics around all that. So there will be one. There will be an announcement who they are. Do I want anything to do with it? Hell no, because I don't know.
One of the traditional challenges of holding a race here in Canada for a lot of organizations, not just Spartan alone, has been getting volunteers. How do you see that challenge this year, especially with the pandemic? You likely need more volunteers than ever.
That's the one that I'm losing sleep over right now, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I know I can build a great race. I know we can hire a build crew who's going to do a great job. I know racers are going to come. We've over the years had great volunteers, but we've never had enough volunteers. And I can remember maybe one or two races out of the 30 or 40 that I've done over the years that I was like, oh my God, we have enough volunteers. This is awesome. And I know that some of the American races, like SoCal, for example, they, their problem is, what do we do with these 700 people? Like, how are we going to keep them all busy? And I won't get into exact numbers because, there was borderline, not negligence, but just in terms of how could we ever decide to go ahead with an event with the number of volunteers that we had at Kimberley a couple of years ago. And we did, and it was safe. It wasn't the super hot year, by the way. It was the next year. And it went off well, but it was just, it was magic, good luck, and sheer grit that we managed to get our super off that weekend. With the number of volunteers, it wasn't 20% of what I would feel comfortable saying is the number that we need. So that brings up two parts. One is that, yes, we'll need more volunteers than ever before, because in addition to all the things that we've always needed to cover, we have hand sanitizing stations, and we have making sure that people aren't breaking rules and things like that. And we're going to have, staggered starts where that start shoot's going to have to be monitored, not just every half hour, but, consistently, and things like that. And we're going to be in a situation where a lot less people are, if you're a diehard racer, you can't wait to get back out there. You're absolutely right. People just want to get out there. But if you're somebody who isn't a diehard racer, and you may be still not in the mindset of leaving your apartment, and why are you going to sign up to volunteer for something that isn't your core passion? And I get that. So I'm already anticipating that it's going to be extra challenging. but I also want to mention that the hardest part of all, so Red Deer, Alberta, we know we're going to have good volunteers because, it's a very established race in Red Deer. We've got Edmonton and Calgary, an hour on either side with the strongest race communities we have. We know we're going to get that one. I'm not saying don't sign up if you're in Red Deer because we need you, but that's one that I'm not up at night thinking how are we ever going to possibly pull off a race there. Golden BC, that frightens me because I had the experience in Kimberley where anyone who's traveling that far to go to race is there to race, right? And as far as a local community, we had Cranbrook half an hour away with 30,000 people who had not heard of Spartan Race before, and now we're trying to get 200 volunteers for the weekend. And Golden's going to be even more of a challenge for that. It's a smaller community. So, we've got some ideas. Obviously, we go to the Hill and we say, hey, who are your seasonal workers who might be off right now that want to be involved in this? Who are the service clubs, the Rotary and the Kiwanis and the dance clubs? And how do we go to the high school and get the kids to get the seniors to get their volunteer hours who might not have them yet? We're going to be going after all those things, but it's definitely tricky. But what I would say is this, and I love telling this story, that what I really recognized about volunteers years ago, the assumption is that volunteers are doing it for the free race. They're doing it because they're trying to get something for it, and that's a totally valid reason to do it. Don't get me wrong. I think that's terrific. I was in Temecula January 2013 at SoCal, and I was there at 5 o'clock in the morning going to my first Spartan race as an employee. I was down there to train and see what was going on, and I saw this great big long line of people in the dark, and I realized, oh, they're the volunteers. And I stopped to talk to them just to say, hey, thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for, it's one thing that I learned real early on from Lee Goss, who was the director of international many years ago, is the idea that, you're never, no matter how fast you have to get there, you're never too busy to pick up garbage and you're never too busy to say hi to people. And very, very important. So I stopped and talked to these volunteers. And what I realized really quickly was that how few of them were there because they were racers. They were all ages and shapes and sizes and backgrounds. And what I realized was they were there because they wanted to be part of something cool and they wanted to make a contribution. It wasn't for the $4 t-shirt and it wasn't for the lunch that they got. It was because they wanted to be part of something really cool. And so from a volunteer standpoint, I do want to say to people that it is a really cool thing to be part of, and the racers appreciate you so much. 1 in 100 racers is a bit of a jerk and yells at the volunteer that they didn't give them the water cup fast enough. The other 99 of the racers are thanking the volunteers left, right, and center. I know from a staff standpoint, I tell my staff that the volunteers are every bit as core part of the team as any one of us is, and that they need to be treated that way. And then the other great thing is, if maybe you're somebody who Spartan racing isn't for you, but it is for your friends or your son races or your mom races or something like that, and you want to be part of it, what a great way to be part of it, to come out and then give her your race credit or give him your race credit. And then the other part of it this year in particular, our objective is to have the full offering at everything. We're going to have spectators, we're going to have kids, we're going to have trail, we're going to have hurricane heats. The reality of the earlier ones is it may very well be that they say you can only have 2,000 people here on that day. And if that's the case, are we going to be able to have spectators? I don't know. Well, but hey, my son's racing, I want to be there. Awesome, volunteer. And then you're there, you're at the event. So yeah, but it's funny. I remember running my first race, and I think everyone who runs their first race does the math. They go, I'm just gonna use round numbers. I paid $100 to race, and there's 8,000 people here. They're making $800,000. And so it's like, why would they need volunteers? And boy, I can tell you the reality is, as the race director who's spending most of my days right now poring over budgets and spreadsheets and looking at medical costs and insurance costs and labor costs and transportation costs and capital expenses, and we will 100% for sure lose money at every race we do this year. There's no doubt about it. And so volunteers are always important as part of the business model. But this year it's even more critical. So yeah, that's a great question. And the avenues for that, obviously on the website, there's always an opportunity to register as a volunteer. I wish I could tell you exactly what it is. If you type in Spartan Race Canada volunteers, I'm sure you'll find it. But also, if you're watching this, it's probably because you subscribe to the social media channels, and we'll be putting out calls there for sure. And the other thing that I think is really key is if you volunteered in the past and enjoyed it, we definitely want you back, and we definitely want you to bring your friends. And that's why I always tell my volunteer managers, my volunteer coordinators, is identify who the super volunteers are, the ones that are just awesome, that are encouraging the racers, that like, man, if I could have them here every year, I would. And then actually make that your mission to get them there every year. Make sure that you stay in touch with them, make sure that they are recognized, and say to that person, man, if I had 10 people like you, how do I get 10 people like you? So if you're a volunteer who's found it really enjoyable and you love it, please become an advocate where you get your friends to come out as well. And I promise you that, and come up to me at the races and remind me I said this, I promise you that making volunteers appreciated is one of my absolute #1 priorities, like where you really will be glad that you're there.
Awesome. Well, look, it's I think every race organizer out there this year has got their hands full with just trying to put on one race. So kudos to Spartan Race for trying to do the 5 and bring in the obstacles and make those consistent across the country, as well as the trail race, bringing that into the portfolio this year as well. So I know for myself personally, I'm looking forward to getting out there to 1 or 2 races and just getting the crates out of the old bones, and just being out there and getting to meet people again and catch up with friends like yourself and others who we've made over the years. So I'm pretty excited about this year and really hope that you guys are able to pull it off.
Cool. And I'll tell you, my TLDR from this that I'm taking away is I got to look into prize money. I got to look into 400-pound tires, and I got to make sure we have these events so I can see you guys. That's what I got.
Wait a minute. On the 400-pound tires, I'm okay if you leave those off of this for this year.
No, I want 5.
Claxton went first, so I got to listen to him.
Yeah, I want 500-pound tires. The bigger, the better. I need every advantage I can get. That guy is too damn fast.
He's a quick one. There's no doubt. And you sure don't get him on the climbing ones either. That doesn't slow him down a bit. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your support. I appreciate everything you guys do. And I really do mean it, that if there's ever another thing that you need me, if there's ever something that comes up that people are asking questions about and you want me to come back here and answer them, I'll always answer honestly, and I'll always, like I say, take it on the chin if I need to.
Hey, well, we appreciate that, Johnny, and so glad you're back in as a manager within Spartan Race. Really looking forward to seeing what you guys put on this year, but more importantly, beyond that, just glad you're a great person like yourself is out there involved helping to push the sport forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. I feel the same way about you.
One more thing, Johnny, I just wanted to say.
Yeah.
A lot of times people say Spartan's not great with their communication, not great with stuff like that. And I just want to say from the community, I appreciate you doing this and being so upfront and honest, answering what you can and just being honest about what you can. So thank you. That's great communication. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. I'll keep doing my best.
Okay.
Well,
thanks, guys.
Take care, mate. Stay safe, and we'll hopefully see you out there on the course soon.
You will.